Welcome, everybody. This is the official welcome to the first webinar of the Voices Project. Today's webinar is called Contemporary Witnesses, and we will be discussing on oral history, counter archives, and adult learning in the context of how we see it in the Voices Project. We're very happy to see you here, and thank you so much for joining through the heat wave. We hope that this webinar will be, an opportunity for all of us to exchange, to learn, to grow together, and this will be good enough to stand in front of a screen during, heavy 30s in Europe currently, and in Belgium, where I am joining you from. So in this webinar, as you very well know, we will explore how in this time when we have loads of debates around migration, loads of debates and discourse around identity, around democracy, around belonging, we will explore how personal testimonies and lived experiences can offer a powerful way to understand history, to understand the history that we're currently living through beyond the official or mainstream narrative. So during this 90 minutes, hopefully, we might get a little bit overboard knowing who we're having with us. But during this 90 minutes, we will have with us experts from academia, from research, from adult education practice, and together we will also see and navigate authentic stories. We will navigate perception of space, of place, of language learning, of narrative and linguistics. And we will together try to see how we can be joined in further action later on. Because as I said in the beginning, this is only the first webinar of a whole process during the Voices project. So what is this Voices project that I am talking about? And also, who am I? I think that's important to also say before we start the discussions. So the Voices project is an Erasmus Plus project that is coordinated by VHS Vienna from Austria and has a partnership that spans across Europe. I am joining you through the European Association for the Education of Adults, BEA. I am the Senior Policy and Projects Coordinator there, and I'm going to be your moderator throughout the day. With us in the partnerships, we also have Daphne Kek from Greece, Aontas from Ireland, Solidarity from Italy, and Sveb as an associated partner joining us from Switzerland. So with that, I will share in the chat the link to our project so that you can already start looking into what we've been doing. But I will give the floor to Susanne Klinzheis, that is joining us from VHS Vienna Lernraum, that is, as you heard, the coordinator of this project, and she will take us through how the project came to be and what we're currently working on. Susanne, I will just do a brief introduction of who you are before you start talking so that we give a little bit of a background. So Susanne studied political sciences with a focus on gender studies, racism, and postcolonial theories at the University of Vienna, and she is working currently on German as a second language, pedagogy, migration education, and trauma-informed education, and she's also a psychotherapist in training. So Susanne, the floor is yours, and we're very, very happy to listen from you.
Hello, good morning also from my side, or good afternoon to other parts of the world that are joining in, as I noticed and heard. So as Angelika said, I'm going to give a short introduction to the project, how it started, where we are at the moment. I will introduce our research report and some insights in the first workshop that were already carried out by VHS Vienna in May. So I'm going to share my screen for you.
lovely. We can see it, Susanne.
Yeah, as Angelike already said, I'm working at Lernraum Wien, which is an institution based in VHS Vienna, a big adult education center, which most of you might know, I guess. So, how did everything start in the Voices project? The idea to the project came up watching the film Wankostetten by Karin Berger. She's an Austrian filmmaker who foremost works on documentaries with contemporary witnesses. In her film, she interviews Karl Stoiker. Karl Stoiker comes from a famous Roma family in Vienna. Karl talks about the history of the Romani community, his own childhood in Vienna and also other parts of Austria. Their arrest by the Nazis in 1943 and the deportation to Auschwitz, where his brother Ossi and most of his family died or were murdered by the Nazi regime. Watching this movie, I thought how interesting it must be, or it could be, for young people, young migrants, to learn about history and to learn about history from those who actually witnessed it, experienced it, and lived it. So the idea was how to bring these stories into teaching, into our courses, into our language courses, basic education courses, and into adult education. Yeah, we started our project with the discussion of a common definition of oral history within the project consortium and our partners. So we so to work on a common basis, on a common definition of what we are actually working with, also to develop a methodology that we can later provide. So we discussed some definitions of oral history that I would like to share with you. And one that I found very convincing was also for our approach and our idea of oral history was from Lynn Abrams, historian from Glasgow. She defined oral history, or she spoke about oral history as a methodology of choice amongst scholars and of the 20th century, seeking to uncover the experiences of a number of groups who had traditionally been disregarded by conventional histories, like women, gay, lesbians, minority ethnic groups, and physically and learning disabled, to name the most prominent, as she quotes. These were important developments. She continues with, it is also a popular research tool deployed in community and educational projects, practiced by young and old volunteers and paid researchers, as it is to be found in use of most of the countries of the world. Oral history has become a crossover methodology, an octopus with tentacles reaching into a wide range of disciplinary, practice-led, and community enterprises. It is used by academics, by governments, and during regime change. It is thus widespread and highly adaptable, being practical, political, or historical in aim. Yeah, we found this very convincing as a definition. There's also another approach by Uli Fuchs and Wolfgang Slapansky. They worked on an oral history project in Vienna, also in a district that was very affected by the Second World War, which is Favoriten. And they worked with a group of contemporary witnesses for quite a long time in the 1980s, and now brought out a new book about this work. And they defined oral history that they say it can contribute to public education and enable a new form of expression. The experience of personal access to and the plasticity of history can foster the development of a new sense of self-awareness among those affected and empower them to play a more conscious role in shaping their everyday lives. In this way, oral history can contribute to the social emancipation and empowerment of individuals. Yeah, we found this very important for working with also with the learners of language courses, basic education courses. So we figured out our own definition of oral history within the project, which is oral history is the practice of recording lived history and personal stories, collecting underrepresented memories, and engaging in emancipatory educational work. It is the fluid, unfinished process of passing on and preserving memories from the interviewee to the interviewer to the collective, filtered through values and ideas. So this was the first step we took within our transnational partner meeting in Vienna when the project started. We then continued with a little desktop research where we researched about migration events in Europe, and there we tried to focus on the ones that had an effect on broader regions within Europe, but also the local parts of our partners. And to get an overview, we designed a timetable with migration events from Europe from the 1950s and onwards, with the perspective of finding contemporary witnesses that actually experienced these periods. So this is the timetable. It is also available on the website. You can use it for workshops. You can print it out in big, and we found it quite useful. The migration events that we were figuring out was more or less the post-war period in after 1945, the Hungarian upspring and the Prague spring in 1968, recruitment agreements with Italy and other southern parts of Europe, with foremost Austria, Germany, and Switzerland, the war in Yugoslavia in the 1990s, and other migration events. You will find it in our report. We also researched about existing projects working with the approach of oral history in teaching, and we figured out some best practices. What we found out was that, of course, there exist a lot of methods and a lot of materials for working with oral history in teaching, but not exactly teaching in adult education and basic education. So we've somehow found that there is a missing link that we could fill out or fill in. We are also doing, of course, this is one of the big results of the project, is a methodology development, which is ongoing and led by IONTAS, based in Ireland. And we already carried out one workshop in Vienna in May. It took place in a basic education course in VHS Vienna. We spent one full week with the learners, like every day we did the workshop, then they went out doing the interviews and came back with the materials, and we met again for 2 days cutting the material, like a raw cutting, rough cutting. You can have an insight to the workshops also on our website, but also here, since you are participating in this webinar. Yeah, these are some insights into the workshops. Of course, we discussed the topic of migration from the perspective of the learners. We also talked, we tried to create a safe space within the workshop. We spent a lot of time getting like on board and making the learners understand what is oral history, what oral history actually is. And on this, I want to point out that the interview at Erinan.at, a site that is created also in Austria, with an interview of Karl Stoiker that I mentioned before, was really impressive for the learners. They were really like impressed by this person, so I can highly recommend to work with this document. And of course, we also focused on the migration story of the learners to get to make them understand what we are working on, which is later speaking about the migration events and migration stories of their interviewees, and to make them understand the connections between their story and the story of the person they are going to interview. So therefore, we made them to show us their migration story and speak about it in general. Here's a little insight in the interview situations. We did 4 interviews on 4 different migration events, which is the Hungarian uprising. Our students interviewed an old lady that actually experienced the Hungarian uprising from her living room. She watched. She could watch what was going on outside in 1956 in Budapest, and also migrant from Turkey, from the Kurdish Turkey part, and also a migration story which is connected to the Yugoslavian war. So, and a little literature. That's it from my side. Thank you for
Lovely.
listening.
Thank you so much, Susanna. Thank you so much, because you also managed to really showcase everything that we've been working on, and it's a really nice instance that actually before this first webinar you did some work already in Vienna. You did the workshops, and we could also see some of the footage already taken. That being said, because this is a process that is still ongoing, and it will look many different ways in many different settings, we thought of bringing together a really lovely bunch of people to help us understand what are many different ways to really grasp these stories, and to also document them and communicate them further. So I'm very happy to jump into the next session of our webinar, and to get together our panelists Maja Maksimović, Sinéad McCoole, and Eirini Skoura. My colleague should be able to give the spotlight now to the speakers. For the speakers, please turn on your cameras if you haven't already, and then we should be able to give you the spotlight. Lovely. Maybe we're missing Sinéad. No, Sinéad is here now. Let me see. I don't see Eirini. Yes, lovely, lovely. Thank you all. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for agreeing to take part in this uh, very warm day, but for a very positively heated discussion. Hopefully, with all the people that we have joining us from around the world. So I would like to already start so that we have as much time as possible to get into our actual discussion. I am going to start with Maja, then we will hear from Sinéad, and then we will close with Eirini, the first initial stage of this discussion. Then we will do a Q&A, and then a just last conclusions and remarks session with Susanna as well. So starting with Maja first. Welcome, Maja. Thank you so much for being with us. Maja Maksimović is an associate professor at the Department of Pedagogy and Andragogy at the Faculty of Philosophy in the University of Belgrade. Her work explores the intersections of education, activism, and the arts with a focus on developing critical, embodied, special, and imaginative approaches to research and practice. She's also a member of the steering committee of the European Society for Research on the Education of Adults, VSREA, and she's a co-convener of its active democratic citizenship and adult learning network, as well as serving as an editor of andragogical studies, and is one of the editors of the European Journal for Research of the Education and Learning of Adults. And of course, her recent book, Landscapes of Learning, Relations of Place, Knowledge and Artistic Practices, was published in 2025 and is going to be one of the main, focal points of this discussion, if I might say, Maja, as well, because the questions that we also prepared for you also interact and intersect place with activation and education. So very happy to have you with us, and very happy to see how you could share with us how you see space, place, and learning interacting, and how could this practice, in your opinion, be related to what we presented and our work on the Voices project. Maja, the floor is
Yes,
yours.
thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation. And I think I was carefully listening to like to the project and the ideas of the project. And I think this will be really important to map the stories and to create this counter archive. So I will talk a little bit about space and place and how we can understand place and space. What is important? Why is it important for learning and especially for adult education? And how basically it can be used in oral history, but also I think it's extremely relevant when we talk about the topic of migration, because when we talk about that topic in particular, place has its specific role, its specific place, let's say. So I will just start by making this difference between place and space. And for me, this was extremely interesting discussion, because as you said in your question, you already mentioned like, oh, so we will talk about space and place. So maybe it is interesting to just refer to that as because the place focus on place is somewhat recent development, as it was the topic, the term of space basically was a bit criticized by by certain philosophers or geographers such as Tim Creswell or Edward Casey, who actually talk about importance to go back to place instead of space. And because space and time were like huge topics in sciences, and they're somewhat abstract. When we talk about space, we talk about more or less like abstract geometrical idea, but why is it important to talk about place, and why is it important to talk about emplacement when we think about adult education, and what are, I would also like to share what are certain methodologies that can be used in oral history, but that are used also in adult education. So, what in research? What is really important to say that in 70s and 80s, something that is called spatial turn took place, and basically the main authors are coming from cultural geography. Geography wasn't that popular before; it was more history, because when we were looking at the development, we were looking from the perspective of time. But what I see in your own project, you have this mixture of basically place and time, because you're working with migrants. So there was this big turn to in which place became very important. And when time was important, we tended to look, and this is important as interpretation category. Time was interpretation category, and then space took it didn't took over, but it became important. And when we think about development, we tend to think it through time, and this is very important for post-colonial thinking, because we think about like, oh, certain part of the world should just reach the developed countries, which I think is also important way of thinking for your project. So basically, when we think about place, we do not think only about location, but we think about different cultural connotation, different materiality. We think about different identity, and we think about that basically place creates our own way of being. So even phenomenologists go so far to say that we only exist with place. So place is inseparable for our way of being. However, in adult education, it has been somewhat neglected, especially not only in adult education, but particularly in formal education, in which place has been only like scenography. It was a kind of void. We didn't think about place, but it was a classroom, and we just put table and we distribute bodies in those classrooms. So we don't think about how can we learn with place, but place is only like a background for learning. So like in 2000 something, we talk about place-based learning, public pedagogy. We talk about critical pedagogy of place, which is a term coined by Greenewald. And this is interesting because he mixed place-based pedagogy and critical pedagogy. So what he tried to see is basically how different power structure that we should analyze and discover how different power structure actually construct place, and how those power structure through constructing place construct our way of being. So it is very much related to critical pedagogy and Freire in terms of how do we learn to understand world. But he introduced the concept of place, and how basically we can understand the world by understanding through the reconstructing where we are, how this place is shaped, and what kind of intervention can we do in order to change that. However, it was somewhat criticized, and because it said it didn't actually pay attention to ecological issues, and it didn't pay attention to this, let's say, indigenous ways of knowing where that are really important for different places. So when we also think about creation of knowledge, we when we take look at place as interpretation, as category for interpretation, then we also think about, is this knowledge universal, or it is really related to certain locality? Is it related? Is it coming from certain locality? And I didn't mention that also place actually creates the way that we understand the world. So it is generative in terms that it creates certain kind of knowledge, and it has this epistemic value as it creates our way of understanding. And also, when we think about transformative learning now, it creates specific scheme of point of references through which we look at the world. So in adult education now, we try to distance ourselves from this idea that place is just an empty background, and that we can just distribute our obedient body who just sit at the table, but to look at different practices that can actually explore learning with place. So these different practices embrace very much different artistic practices that are some of them are created in 50s and 60s by situationists, and those are the famous derive psychogeography that actually try also to look at how different power structure organize our everyday life, but they do not stay on the level of just analyzing these structures, but they tend to create interventions in space that will automatically be playful and create a different way of being in the world. We also have wandering, and how we actually can explore the place without goal, and how we can let our body receive those sensations from the place, not only to observe, but to really be with the place and explore materiality of that place. And somehow through this unstructured wandering, we do not wander only in an unknown place, but we try to look with a fresh eye what has been already seen. So it is like, how do we enter the place, and how do we enter the unknown? So in relation to adult education and to your project, so I see I have just a few more minutes. I think it is migration is very much related to place, mapping, and like how do we do this walking interviews when we do oral history? So how can we go to different places, go through different public spaces, and how maybe just to talk with people by elicit memories of the place. What is specific for migration is something that we can call that is called solstalgia. One Australian author introduced this term, and this is being and it's very much related to ecological crisis that we have. It is that places, for different reasons, economic, ecological, are lost. So when we think about migration, it is also full of this loss. It is loss of place. Which is also related to losing one's identity. When we are separated from the place, we also somehow lose part of our identity. So the question is, how can we actually elicit those stories that are related to this painful loss of identity? And there is a lot of grieving in there. So how to connect those two worlds by talking about that, and by having in mind the importance of locality, the importance that this place is very ontological, and it creates a specific sense of being. So I would say for oral history, it would be also interesting to, I think it is important to introduce different visual methods. So maybe different kind of mapping where we just like try to connect two worlds and try to connect a different way of being. So who I was back there, and I always like to use this anthropological concept of liminality, because being in migration is being at the beginning is being somewhere in between, which is like the meaning of liminality. Like I'm not anymore who I was because I changed locality, but I'm still not the new person because I'm still adjusting. So they say like a person who is in this liminal space is an orphan. So the self is wandering in this place. So how to be very, my question is also how to be very gentle when we try to listen to those stories. Maybe what I heard also from Susanne is that you also talk with migrants who have been in certain country for years, for decades. So it is very different than talking with people who just arrived or who arrived 1 year ago. So I think art-based method, visual methods, wandering around neighborhood, because they're already creating their own little worlds. So maybe they want to show something and to talk about it. Maybe they want to show you photos or objects. It is very interesting when I think Tatiana Claubert, Hogan Claubert, she presented a very interesting project at the SRIA conference, and she talked with Ukrainian people who came to Germany, and what kind of object actually, what did they brought with them. So I think it's also interesting to work with objects, to work with images, and to try to maybe work with images of those places where they came from. So you create a kind of this counter archive by wandering, making photos, talking about objects and so on.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Maja. I mean, already there are so many things that, I would love to grasp and to comment on. I will just try to keep it as brief as possible. But I find what you said about how art can be a way to create interventions in place is very important and very key for the work that we are also doing, and the way that we chose to create this counter archive and document this counter archive by creating small documentaries where we explore places, spaces, objects, as you said, because there is a great power in reclaiming structures and reclaiming places and reclaiming space. So thank you so much. I'm sure that also many people, I see several like clapping hands popping up in the screen. So I will say that if you have any questions for Maja, you can already put them in the chat, or you can keep them for the Q&A session. So thank you, Maja, for
Thank
this
you so much.
initial interaction. I will then follow through and go and welcome Sinéad in the discussion. I would also like to thank Sinéad particularly because you also agreed to take part in this webinar quite at a last minute. So thank you so much. We're really happy to have you here. I will give just a brief bio for you so that people also know where you're joining us from. So Sinéad McCoole is an Irish historian, author, broadcaster, script writer, historical and picture researcher, and an exhibition curator. She's the author of Easter Widows, on the widows of the men executed in 1916 Rising, published by the Doubleday Ireland. While as a curator, she has originated and collaborated on a number of important exhibitions, both in Ireland and the US, with her areas of expertise, including the Rising, the War of Independence, and Civil War, with an emphasis on the role of women. And this is where we will also central our question in this discussion. And Sinéad is also currently the head of exhibitions, learning and programming at the National Library of Ireland. Welcome, Sinéad. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. And yes, we're really happy to hear from you and see how you find that oral history practices can provide space for people and communities that have been maybe systemically excluded, as you worked with women. We would like to see if you've been met with these questions that we are also asking ourselves, and these practices that we are currently discussing. So, Sinéad, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to Aintis in Ireland and Larissa in particular for the opportunity to join this discussion. I suppose I'd like to start by saying that 30 years ago in Ireland, as I was an early career historian, I was using methodologies like oral history, mainly because I was interviewing people who were advanced in age. And there was, it was, in nursing homes and in places in their homes, and, tiredness and inability really, and, a bit overwhelmed. And most of the time I was being sent by younger members of their family who knew they were involved, but they hadn't got them to talk about it particularly. This was about that revolutionary period that you're talking about. So that would have been, 80 years before. And these people were quite advanced in age. So I began to use what was at then accessible to people. So there was the tape recordings and so it was actual tapes and smaller ones as well that solicitors used, so that it wasn't intrusive, so that it wasn't set up as much as an oral interview as a sort of a recording that allowed me to take what they said. And what I look back on my own methodology was that I was too interventionist at the time. There wasn't the methods that were there for oral history that there are today, which are techniques that you teach people in order to take this type of interview. But also, I was coming from the academic background of a historian, where we saw oral history as a flawed source. And that was really quite difficult, because not alone was I recording interviews to sort of hear what they had to say, but as I went to those interviews to try and extrapolate information, I was very colored by the notion that this wasn't a true way. I found through the years with oral history sourcing that you'll rarely get somebody who you feel has got proper recall. And I think that's somewhat a negative. So what has been described already, the story this morning by Maja, is definitely methods that I would encourage, which is the use of material culture, the use of objects, the use of describing photographs by asking people to enter into their past by something tangible. I suppose, given the role that I'm in, I'm not speaking here in terms of the library, but I'm speaking here from my own experience. But my role in the library also encompasses adult education. And something that we've been looking at within the library is, one, to look at the source material that we have within the library's collection that may, in some, part of the collection is a colonial archive that was collected. We were a branch library of the British Library, as we were still a colony up into, our partition happened in as a result of the 1920 Act, and then we had a civil war, and after our break with England, so we had a lot of a state. We stayed as a democracy. We had lost our language earlier on, so there's a huge revival in Ireland with the Irish language. But what we're finding, so Ireland opened up to people. Our laws and restrictions were lifted more or less 30 years ago. So what we had was, and we still do, we have a lot of Irish people who leave for periods of time, because traditionally that's what's been happening for over 100 years. So we'll see our young people across the world. Some return home, but when people come into the country, we're still navigating that. And I think what's really important to sort of understand within this project across Europe is that, one, the idea of when you talk about the fact that, there's so many different languages, English is the guiding language in relation to commonality. So therefore we have an advantage there in terms of gathering materials. But I suppose the interesting thing also that came out of the discussion this morning is the fact that we're moving towards what we call shared island, and the use and terminology of home place is the one that's most acceptable. So the idea being that use of place and the use of the word home allows for a lot of discussion through periods of trauma for people. But where I think the interest lies with me as a collecting body, and obviously you're collecting, digital data that will stay on the internet, that will be accessed by people in that sort of cyberspace. And then I think to the tangible culture that you have. So if you look at it and you're creating something, and the dispersal of information through academic articles. So it's the cohesiveness of the outcome for an adult education. So I'm curious to sort of understand about how it enters into the canon. How do you get it into the methods so that it becomes something that's taught and integrated? And I suppose Larissa may have asked me also, because part of the work that I did in the 1990s in particular was gathering an archive. I was working in a prison, which had been a political prison, and I just went out in the community and I gathered material. But we gathered the photographs. I copied material. I put it into that collection, and then we did a decade of commemoration. So my work was central to that decade of commemoration because I'd gathered the archive that those years before. And what was interesting about that archive was when I started out the archive looking at women, the photographs weren't collected, the people weren't being brought into the museums or the archives or the places, their material wasn't considered to be relevant. So my one sort of observation so far is, if you take a very rigid line with regard to historic events, and of course that makes me immediately comfortable because there's a chronology and there's a structure and all of that. But what I'm thinking is that you might find something along the way. And there was a very interesting project in Germany. I was a member of the International Board of Women's Museums for a while, and in Germany they began to collect patchworks of people who were selling them out of their countries in war-torn storytelling through the making. So I'm very interested in that as a sort of a way of not, beyond language, beyond the physicality of trying to capture people who still don't have a voice. And I think that some of the material that comes into other countries, this is the bit I wanted to get to for understanding, is you might be talking to somebody in a place where they are or they have come from, but it's the idea of where does the archive go? So the idea being is, if you look at population groupings, so the clusterings of people where they go to mix with each other, those we've talked already about mapping. So it's mapping those centers that relate to those people, and then how do they identify and how do they cluster together? So when you look at the idea of clustering in terms of place, the idea being is that people, when they enter a new country, rarely, unless they have a very, very strong profession that they can do. So in Ireland in particular, people can't practice their professions in the main because they don't have the qualifications. So looking for those people and looking for those communities can be hard. But sometimes I think if you look through the sort of the hobby in one way is one way to get the sort of the material culture, if you know what I mean, those groupings, and then it's the professional piece. So sometimes we tend to go into the community, we go to people who are struggling, we take their stories. But what I'd like to sort of ask people to think about within this project is maybe perhaps to look at those people who are succeeding, that come into the countries and sort of enter into their professions and don't need the system, like the governmental system, maybe don't need the education system, maybe already feel that they're educated. Because I think the insights that somebody has where they're observing their groupings, observing the piece, they're living apart, but they're still identifying as that culture, is that sort of in juxtaposition. So if you go to a place and you're Irish and you can find your way and find an Irish bar, but what we would tend to do is go to places and look for communities, as in networks. So Irish people navigate through networks and always have done. It's part of back to the past of the clan structure. So we've always worked in groupings that interlap and over things, but a lot of countries do not. And that's what I think is, when you look at this project, you've got a wonderful opportunity. But if you, for example, you are putting those videos that you've already created in and asking the networks to distribute them, you're looking for additional people and those exceptions. So as you gather, you're trying to navigate the idea of what are you missing? Because we're all coming to it from a very sort of center thing. And what I found, as I said, just to conclude, is that you're never going to overcome youth. You're never going to overcome your interviewer. You're never going to overcome your limit of knowledge. And I know that Maja will have understood over her period of her studies that, you know, it's the next book and it's the next spark and it's the next thing. So the main thing is that you're doing it, but you feel that your contribution is focused, as you have said, within education and adult education. So come back all the time to the methods of dissemination as much as the gathering. And what I would say to you is, once you figure out the dissemination routes, sometimes the actual project becomes informed in a completely different way, because we so often start from what we want to gather rather than what are we trying to do once we gather whatever we gathered. So that's my conclusion. And thank you again for having me.
Thank you so much, Sinéad. And I think that's super important for us as well. And you know, it's also a question that your last one was also a question that was very important for us when we first were creating the project, with the notion, oh, we would like to utilize oral history for learning, but then what do we do with it? And this is where the idea for a counter archive began, because we said, yeah, we should do something with it that in itself could could have its own life. But this is what we are currently exploring, and it's I find particularly interesting what you said, that how do we consider a material relevant, and for whom do we see the material relevant or not relevant? And especially, like, where does this go to and what do we study? And when you said what do we actually look into, and who do we choose to interview and which stories we choose to tell, and you gave us an example to gather from success, I think that this lines in very well to what we will discuss with our next speaker, with Eirini, because we will touch, Eirini, on the concept of tracing racism in anti-racist discourse. And I think the choice of the stories really well lies within that. Do we only choose, stories of dread instead of stories of success, because they, bind better with this our already what we already conceive as fitting to this particular target group of vulnerability. So thank you so much, Sinéad, and I will now go into the last question of this first round to Eirini. And Eirini, I will also thank you for being here. Eirini Skoura is a PhD candidate in linguistics at the University of Patras in Greece, specializing in migration narrative and public discourse analysis. And her research, very interestingly to what we're doing today, explores how migration is represented in political, media, and institutional and social discourse, and how these representations shape public understanding of migration and social diversity. University. She is particularly interested in the relationships between discourse, social inequalities, and education, as well as translating research findings into educational practice through critical literacy initiatives. And she is a doctoral fellow of the Hellenic Foundation for Research and Innovation. So thank you so much, Eirini. As you know, we want from you specifically to help us dive into another initiative that is very relevant, in our opinion, for our work, especially on constructing narratives in oral history and the counter archive that we're trying to build, specifically through the initiative that you're currently working on, the TRACE initiative on tracing racism in anti-racist discourse. So we would love if you could share with us the links that you find with our effort to document oral history and your work. And I believe that you also have a PowerPoint presentation to share, so feel free to share that. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Let me share the PowerPoint. Can you see it?
Yes, we can see it.
Thank you once again very much for the invitation. I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to discuss some connections between the Voices project and my ongoing PhD research, which has been developed within the broader framework of the TRACE project. As you just mentioned, TRACE stands for Tracing Racism in Anti-Racist Discourse, and is a research project led by Professor Argyris Archakis at the University of Patras in Greece. And the aim of the project was to examine how racism may be implicitly reproduced in seemingly anti-racist texts. And one of the key observations emerging from this of research is that in contemporary public migration narratives circulating in media, political and institutional texts, European host societies tend to be presented as tolerant, inclusive and respectful of diversity, while at the same time migrants are frequently represented as vulnerable in need of protection or as successfully assimilated subjects who adapt to the language and cultural norms of the majority society, often leaving behind the elements and characteristics that mark their difference. And an extensive analysis on a large Greek corpus of public texts, we observed that although these representations appear inclusive, they may implicitly reproduce inequalities between majority and migrant groups, projecting the cultural inferiority or incompatibility of different others in relation to dominant values. And when such representations repeat within the public sphere, they become naturalized, normalized, and they establish specific expectations about what migrants should do and who they should be accepted. Acceptance is therefore presented as conditional upon assimilation rather than recognition of migrants as equal members of society. And in contrast to this background, we also became interested in how migrants position themselves in relation to these dominant public representations and expectations. And to explore this question, we have collected and analyzed autobiographical narratives produced by adult migrants living in Greece. The narratives were collected through an educational activity conducted within the context of voluntary Greek language courses offered by a grassroots advocacy collective supporting migrants and refugees and located in Patras. And rather than approaching these narratives as personal testimonies, we analyze them as social practices through which migrants evaluate their experience, negotiate their relationship with the host society, and position themselves in relation to a broader representation of migration. In other words, we are interested not only in migrants' experience, how they narrate these experiences, and how they position themselves through their language choices. Let me briefly illustrate this with two examples. One comes from a participant from Jordan who stated the difficulty was that I did not know the language, not understanding other able to speak and communicate. I had difficulty being accepted in society with a hijab, so I stayed at home most days. I was always alone. Now I'm doing very well with my children and husband. I learned the language at school. In this narrative, we observe that language difficulty is initially presented as a key obstacle to social participation, and it reflects the broader assumption that communication and participation depend primarily on migrants adapting to language norms, placing the responsibility largely on them. Furthermore, the reference to difficulty being accepted with a hijab shifts the exclusion to a cultural and religious level, revealing that the host society does not function as an equally inclusive society for those who diverge from dominant norms. In this sense, we can say that the narrator does not present these difficulties as personal things, but rather attributes them to the attitudes and expression of the host society. At the same time, however, the narrator links the improvement of her everyday life to learning Greek and adapting to the new environment. She says, now I'm doing very well, I learned the language at school. And this aligned with broader expectations that language acquisition and adaptation are necessary conditions for migrants' integration. In this sense, we can say that this narrator promotes a hybrid positioning, as he simultaneously acknowledges the importance of language learning and exposes the limitations of dominant assumptions about integration. The second example comes from a participant from Iraq, who after describing experiences of homelessness, violence and racism, he explains, then I got better in work, there is still a lot of racism because they do not want foreigners. Then I met my wife, Greek, and we married, and her family didn't, and we have 2 children together, and still they do not want us and do not speak to us. Greece is nice. This narrative, I think, is particularly revealing because it highlights some of the contradictions embedded in common integration discourses. The narrator appears to fulfill several of the criteria commonly associated successful integration. He has found employment, he has established a family, he has built a life in Greece, and yet his acceptance remains incomplete, as shown by the continued rejection from his wife's family. The narrator explicitly denounces racism, stating that there is still a lot of racism, and in doing so, he attributes his experiences of exclusion not to a lack of adaptation on his part, but to the attitudes and practices of the host society. His experiences, therefore, challenge the assumption that adaptation automatically leads to social recognition and belonging. At the same time, however, the final positive evaluation of the host society, Greece is nice, suggests that the narrator avoids a complete rupture with the host society without withdrawing his earlier critique. And this positive evaluation also reflects a degree of alignment with broader expectations of adaptation and attachment of migrants to the host countries. Once again, we encounter a hybrid positioning as the narrator criticizes exclusionary experiences while simultaneously expressing attachment to the society in which he lives. Taken together, this narrative suggests we can say that migrants do not simply reproduce dominant representations, nor do they completely reject them. Rather, they move between alignment and divergence, combining both adaptation to and critique to dominant expectations. And in this sense, migrants and their experiences are not confined to binaries that portray them either as passive victims or as successfully assimilated. Instead, they often occupy in between positions that foreground the complexity and the hybridity of migration experiences. For this reason, we understand such migrants' narratives as sites of negotiation of public discourses and expectations, as they combine adaptation with critique, vulnerability with agency, and the need for integration with the questioning of the conditions under which it is demanded. Importantly, migrants are not merely passive recipients of dominant expectations, but social actors that often question, challenge, and even explicitly denounce exclusionary attitudes and racist practices within the host society. And this is where I think we can see a strong connection with this project. Oral history and counter archives give us access to perspectives that are often absent from mainstream representations of migration, and their value lies, I think, not only in documenting experiences that might otherwise remain unheard, but in fostering empathy and empowerment, but also in creating opportunities to reflect critically on dominant assumptions about migration and integration. And in this sense, such narratives can be challenging for the majority audiences too, as they often reveal experiences and forms of exclusion that we do not expect and that remain invisible in dominant public narratives. So in this respect, projects such as Voices, I think, are particularly valuable because they create spaces where they can express their experiences in their own terms rather than through narratives that are considered desirable or expected by the majority society. And listening to migrant stories, therefore, means more than collecting testimonies. It means creating space for complexity, hybridity, negotiation, dimensions that are often from public debates about migration. And here are some references, some funding information of my PhD, and thank you very much for your attention and for the invitation.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Eirini. And it's always so nice to see the work and the comparable research work that is being done in different settings. I think that's really, really important for us as well. And best of luck in your research, because it really sounds really interesting, and I hope that there is also maybe even some more direct connection that we could establish with the project, and even explore it a bit more. I particularly liked what you said about moving through alignment and divergence, and we see that in the narratives that, of course, they cannot. Sometimes we get this predisposition that people will either love something or hate something, and that's never the case, and that never goes within this conditional integration and filling in these conditions for integration. So it's very, very interesting to see that, and see also how that connects to the place, because hearing what you said and saying that Greece is a nice country, or Greece is lovely or something, and what I was thinking is that probably this referred to the place rather than the conditions or the society, that the unfriendly society around it, but it had to do with the connotations of place and space and what this meant to the person. So thank you so much for this presentation, and thank you to all of the speakers. I would invite now Susanne to join us in this next part of the discussion for the open Q&A. So first, I would open the floor to the audience. You can use the chat to ask your questions, or raise your hand and unmute yourself to ask something to our speakers. I know that I have plenty of questions, but I don't want to start with those. I would love to have someone else first asking a question. Lovely. I see a comment saying that thank you for the interventions. They threw a totally different light in notions that used to be clear before, but apparently they were also sterilized. Thank you. Thank you, Vasiliki, for your statement. I don't know if you would like to say something else to the group. No. Thank you. Anyone else? Any questions? Also, maybe from the project. I don't know if any of the partners or the participants have a question. Well, maybe I can start with a question and then see if others are also.
I just saw, sorry, John, I think, raised the hand, if I'm right. Am I right?
Yes, John, you can unmute yourself. Let's see. Can you We can't hear you. Yes, maybe now. Yes, lovely.
To introduce myself, I'm what you might call an old boomer. Okay, I'm the oldest looking guys that's on the screen. So we have a men's shed and a U3A, and a lot of our topics has to do with migration. People of my generation in Ireland, anyway, we went away. As Sinead pointed out, we went to other places. We weren't used to people coming into us. They would visit us, and that was it. There was a pop singer back in the 80s called Phil Lynott, and he was probably the only black guy in Dublin at that time. So the thing is that it's a lack of understanding. There's already an established discourse, in other words, a way of talking about people, a way of looking at people. And in my generation, a lot of them in discussion want to sort of like enforce their understanding, as it were. Okay. And we have to find in our discussions is trying to navigate through particular biases, particular prejudices, obviously. And there's a lack of understanding of what we actually mean when we say certain things, etc. So when it comes to racism, for example, it's nice and handy to look at someone and have a particular view on them. But if you delve further down into asking them about is that the color of the skin of someone is actually a particular trait because they got more melanin in their skin than you do, etc. And as a trait, but then shall we discriminate against people who have blue eyes? Let's keep them all out. The other thing is that in discussing in this particular demographic, is that we ourselves are subjected to ageism, and is a kind of an acceptable discrimination, as it were. And if ageism is an acceptable discrimination, it gives in my view, it gives a license to discriminate others. Okay, so one of the things that we did was in another club, my background is in e-learning or computer learning, etc. And with another historical society, we developed an oral history e-learning course. The idea was that in history, not all of them, but there's a lot of heated discussions about what is and what is not, etc. And so it's a way of looking at finding a way, a common understanding, a common method, a common way of looking at certain events and interpreting them in a certain kind of way that's acceptable to everybody, as it were. And then it ends up being different as well. But that's the thing. The thing that I liked about is that the critical pedagogy is, I think, one of the key areas to sort of like open up the can, as it were, because we have, in my view, an understanding of education that also holds on to discriminations, that holds on to a way of talking about certain things. And we never have the way to deconstruct the way these narratives are already part of the conversations with people. That's my comment. I could go on, but I won't. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, John. Thank you. Thank you for the statement. Thank you for everything. I know that Masood has also a question. So maybe we go through Masood's questions and then we open it to the panel speakers to comment on John's and Masood's comment. So Masood, the floor is yours. You can unmute yourself. We can't hear you. Can you unmute yourself? I am asking you to unmute yourself if you can. You can go to your your speaker sign. Yes, lovely.
Yes, no. Are you hearing? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. I have heard all these things. Different people have been talking. In fact, I want to say something about what we do in Pakistan about adult education. The interesting thing is that education, if we talk for the purpose of adult education, in Pakistan, what we do is that we enroll the adults whose ages are more than 14 years. And then we educate them for 2 years only. And in 2 years, we enable them to qualify higher school education. No, this is something unique. Nobody else is doing here in Pakistan. And for this purpose, we have developed special short courses so that the children can start learning from the basics of the language, basic of mathematics, and basic of English also. And then the actual course, actual syllabus of the board, which is taught to the higher education class. And we have excellent results. More than 16,000 young people, adults, have passed education in this way. Now, what interesting is that the most important thing is that the people who are not educated, they're deprived, they're mentally depressed. The way we talk is in the style which brings them into the mainstream of the education, main style of people. The way you have learned, the way I have learned. But for them, this is not possible because our normal education system is that in 5 years, in 8 years, in 7 years, 10 years, we go to the higher education. But for these adults who might have not studied anything, we have developed a special syllabus for course. This enables them to cover up all those deficiencies, or part of them, which we had been discussing at the moment about the areas, about other matters. So I think that what I say, we need to have a more detailed, if I have more long time and I can start from ABC to the details, it's going to be a very useful thing. And this can bring those people who are not who are isolated, they can be brought back to the mainstream and become our part, in fact. And we have been successful. In Pakistan, before us, apart from us, there's a department that is called, this government department, that is called literacy department. They educate the people only literacy for the poor people who are shopkeepers, who are laborers, or who are downtrodden people, so they can live a normal life, human life in the society, about the laws, about the system. But they can't go higher. It's some little bit different. If they work with this program which I am talking, they can go to highest position as much as they wish and they want. And so I think what I have said must also be considered. And I think this is a point I have submitted here for you to kindly see and see possible if we can do more work on this. I don't know about the Europe, but I have gone to India. I find India is very useful for them also. I've gone to Philippines. I find useful for them also. But your place, because you have a little bit different problem. You have mostly problem of migrations. But even if there is a migration, the migrant people, they are not part of society. Psychologically, they have to be made part of society. For they have to build at a certain level that they feel comfortable and they're upgraded and in a better position, so they feel comfortable, and maybe all the negative terms which are already available to those people, they are able to control them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Masood. I will give the floor to Larissa and then Susanne.
Well, thanks very much. Sorry, I know we only have 5 minutes left, and if you'll have any questions, you can email us, and we'll say it to the panelists. But I think I would like just to thank you all, and I would like to thank you all. And I just have a question in relation to our project. You know, our project is specifically, we are looking at working with the most marginalized from our society, with the migrants who do have more difficulties to integrate. So from your perspective, I am wondering if you could give us your view on the most important thing that we should consider in terms of oral history, or why do you think that this method could actually be a breach, if you think so, between them and their integration process? That makes sense.
I don't know if someone from the speakers would like to address Larissa's question. Yes, Sinéad. And then
Just
Maja.
Larissa, I just wanted to just refer back to you. I know that the project is focused on that grouping, but one of the things I suppose maybe I didn't articulate properly is that part of a counter archive is to take the people that have been successful within the countries and use that as part of the counter archive. I suppose that was what I was trying to get across with it, is that so often the collection of material in particular is people who, are found through the police archives, the jail registers, the workhouse records, the people who are not succeeding within those cultures. And sometimes it's the perspective of the people. This is what I've found with people that I've worked with in Ireland already within the capacity in the National Library, is that we've had a lot of access to artists and different people. But when you listen and you drill into their own definition of it, is sometimes it's a motivation because of the funding stream or what they think that people want to know. And so what I would think is that if you go counter flow for this and do a cross comparison piece, that perhaps that might yield something different. That's what I'm saying, that if you keep looking at your dissemination piece, what are you it's the beginning. I find so often with these projects that the method, this is the piece around the methodology. This is a starting point for yourselves. And if you're asking people who've been in spaces looking at this material, they have different insights. And I think that your three speakers today, well, I would see the other two speakers today rather than myself, because I think they talk in more specifics. They're more in the area. I'm really talking from, again, maybe a more historical point of view. But I'm going to put some questions into the chat, and they're not meant to be in any way provocative. It's just that I know that this is a project that you're looking for inspiration and for guidance in relation to it. And I think that your participants sometimes don't get to come in afterwards, but if you speak to the people who've joined here, they may also have insights but not want to be able to speak on camera or be recorded. So I think that for that reason, I'm putting my questions there as only a way to talk to the people within the audience that perhaps they may feel that they have answers. So thank you again for having me. And
thank you so much, Sinéad.
Thank you so much, Sinéad. I would really love to go to Maja for her statement. We might take another couple of minutes after 11:30 if for the people that want to stay with us, because I think that this is a very fruitful discussion. And then we also have a couple of questions also in the chat. So Maja, if you could make your statement, and then we'll go through the chat.
Yes, thank you so much. I have another meeting at 11:45, so I might have to leave, just to say. So thank you so much for, I would say I agree very much with the point on dissemination and what do we do basically with all these stories that we collect. And I think I was working on the project Tradition of Resistance, mapping the participants of student movements in different, like in 90s, anti-war protests and so on. So to see how to explore how there is something like invisible curriculum, how people learn from the past, from different student movements. And what was really a good practice practice is that Minja Bogavac, who is a director and dramaturg, she's written a piece, like she collected all those stories and she wrote a kind of a theater piece, which is not a theater piece. And now at the moment there are public readings that are going on. So citizens are invited to take a role of a person who shared his or her stories and read, and then we discuss. So I think it's really important to, besides stories being accessible digital, to have this experience and community aspect where basically one can really learn about it by being in the certain role. So people also who participate in the interviews were invited, but it really depends if someone feels comfortable or not to read that aloud or to be recognized. But anyhow, people, I think it can be read in different places, libraries, museums, like different public places. So yes, thank you very much for having me here. I love working with all of you and EAE especially, and I'm sorry if I have to leave before the webinar is over.
No, thank you so much, Maja. Thank you so much. Always a great pleasure working with you. I know that Susanna had a question, but Susanna, is that okay if I first go through the chat? Lovely. So already for the first question, coming from Karin on safeguarding themselves for the researchers when they interview partners whilst conducting interviews in regards to trauma in particular. Susanna already has answered that it was a very important element of also our work, and in the methodology that you can find on our website, which was shared before, but also I will ask one of my colleagues to maybe put it again on the chat. You can find the oral history methodology that we used by Sonfield. That is there accessible for you. I will just also, I don't know if any of our speakers had a comment on this question. You can answer this with the other question that we have in the chat coming from Bea on intersectionality and how we can find commonalities and patterns when experiences of migration are so different and shaped by different social identities. So how can we avoid simplifying or only representing certain experiences while also practically having a limit to how many people's experiences can be included in order to find meaning in our research. So the question on intersectionality, I know that I am really driven to answer that myself, but I will give the floor. I will give the floor to the rest of the speakers first, if you have any thoughts. I don't know. Yes, Susanne.
Yeah, the question of intersectionality is of course relevant, and maybe Angelika, you can add some more words to it. But I think what we want to focus on is actually the similarities or the common experience that migration in general is part of, or that anybody who migrates also in terms of space, losing place or losing their place. In reference to Maja, what Maja said, there are a lot of common experiences when within migration, and that is what I think we are focusing on in this project.
Yeah. I agree, and what I was going to say is that, you know, searching for commonalities does not mean that you're not seeking differences and you're not opening up space for differences. It can actually mean exactly that you're opening that place because you're seeking to create connections with several experiences in order to open up the process and invite more stories to be shared. And that is the very notion of a counter archive. You create the space in order to find where people connect, what people connect with, and this can look like success. This can look like failure. This can look like alignment. That can look like divergence. So it can look like very like conflicting things, but in the essence is the opportunity to share the most stories possible, so that people can find something that seems similar to their experience. Yes, Maja, and I see that Sinéad has added the questions that are very interesting, and I will also say that we will share these questions and also the discussion from the chat in a follow-up email, so that the discussions can follow through. Yes, Maja.
Yes. So before I leave, just a few things. I'll try to be quick. So in terms of like you already mentioned this process, like how of vicarious trauma, how interviewers are influenced by stories, and what we all have different histories of migration. It might not be that difficult, but we have different histories of losing the place, being in the place, and so on. So I think it's what would I suggest to organize some kind of like group for interviewers where you share like how you experience these stories, and then you support each other. So working with someone, or it can be a peer group, but I think that's very important aspect, because it can be like on a bodily level, it can influence a lot. Another thing, what I found also interesting, but maybe for the continuation of the project, is how we actually support people who are interviewees to become interviewers. So to like try to teach. I don't want to say that, but to like how they can also interview their colleagues, their friends, their community, and then I think that can be very interesting when we switch the role and try to work on that level.
That is part of the workshop, actually, that they also interview themselves and then go out and interview other people.
Yeah. Lovely. Okay, so I see everything online. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. You will receive also Sinéad's questions, because I know that these are also very useful for the consortium internally. Thank you so much for being here, for taking the time. I wish you a lovely day ahead, a chill day someplace if you're also struggling with the heat, and yes, have a lovely noon. Thank you once again. Thank you for being with us. Thank you to Maja, to Sinéad, to Eirini, to Susanne, to Larissa, to Masoud, to John, to Bea, to Karin, everybody that connected today. Thank you so much. Have a lovely day.
Same to you also.
Thank you all.
Thank
Thanks so
you.
much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.